We're going to talk about some SaaS today.
Love SaaS. Let's talk about
it. Genuinely thank you all for being here. A lot of great faces, some new, some old. Really excited about the topic that we're going to talk about tonight. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Josh Mullis. I'm the VP of Information Security at Productive. Kind of want to go through a quick agenda for what we're going to talk about. You all may have walked in and been like, wow, there's a bunch of cameras. That's not at all what I expected. Apologies for that. We got to feed the marketing monster. The intent isn't for Suki and I to sit up here and talk to all of you for an extended period of time. We're going to talk maybe 5 or 10 minutes, sort of set the stage for the framework of how we're thinking about shadow AI. And that's what we talked about. The topic was going to be. But then we want to open it up. We want it to be an open dialogue. There is a lot of experience in this room. We have CTOs, we have CIOs, we have CISOs. And so really we wanted to open it up for collective experience. To share your experiences, your challenge, and some of the solutions that we can potentially go through. Before we get into any of that, who are we? Who's the sponsoring company? So this isn't a sales pitch. I did promise many of you that ahead of time, but why is this relevant to us? Productive itself is a SaaS management company. So software as a service. We give you visibility into your SaaS portfolio, into the actual features and usage, the license allocations, to really empower you when it comes time to make decisions around intake for new applications, retiring applications, renewing applications, things like that. So it's everything to do with the governance around your SaaS portfolio, which is obviously very relevant in the shadow AI space because a lot of that is included in the SaaS landscape. But enough about me, enough about Productive. Much more interestingly, we have Shuktika here, who is from Snap, so most famous for Snapchat, Snap Augmented Reality, and has a very tenured career in cybersecurity. So do you want to tell us a little about yourself and why you're here?
Yeah, sure. Been in the space for, I guess, about 15 years now, specializing in a lot of cybersecurity strategy, risk management, and most recently at Snap, leading our privacy engineering team. And we, at Snapchat, take it really, really seriously, the privacy of our user data, as well as sensitive data in general, but also really making sure that we're capitalizing and monetizing on all of the Gen AI technology that's out there and being able to launch it in our products, in our models, as well as in our protective mechanisms like detecting spam and abuse. A lot of the conversation here, I just want to qualify, will be a lot of my own personal views. So take it as is, but, excited to explore this topic with you guys. It is a very new space. There are things that we're doing. There's a lot of things that I think the industry in itself needs to develop in terms of like protective mechanisms. So it's a fun space to kind of explore these ideas here. Yeah.
Awesome. We really appreciate you joining us tonight.
Thank you.
So just sort of level set what we're talking about again. What is shadow AI? Many of you probably already know it. Many of you have probably run into it. But I think it's helpful to sort of set the history of what got us here as an evolution of shadow IT. So the shadow IT term was coined by Gartner back in 2008, 2009. It used to be servers that were sitting under somebody's desk. Somebody left the laptop running in a closet that shouldn't have been there. It was slow, it was organic. Yes, we needed network detection capabilities, but it was much more manageable. Fast forward into the late 2010s, emergence of SaaS as a commodity. We started to see more and more adoption of it. We hit the pandemic 2020 and it skyrockets. It is enabled a business at any cost. Anybody with a corporate card can go expense it. There's freemium that's out there that people can go sign up. Okay, great. Organizations start to partner with companies like Productive to get their visibility around where there's shadow IT coming in. They start to be able to rein that back in, govern some of it. We're lucky enough to have a couple customers in here that we've been able to partner with and really start to get a handle on that. Great. Start to see the light a little bit at the end of the tunnel. Bang, introduce AI. We're starting to see the LLMs pop up left and right. There's engineering work that's being done. But more importantly, the shadow AI aspect of it is even those things where you think you know and you have a visibility over your SaaS portfolio, all of a sudden there's now AI features that are being included that you may not have visibility into. So it's really what we're here to talk about tonight is that shadow AI aspect, some of the challenges associated with it, and maybe some solutions or frameworks that can help govern it. And again, we'll open it back up and we want to get a lot of participation as we get into it. So jumping right into the questions, Shuktika, I want to get your perspective here. So considering the diverse uses of generative AI, how do you start to think about categorizing them as it pertains to this discussion?
Yeah. There's going to be very loose categorization, not including just the myriad of architectures and things that are out there for it. But in essence, when we think about like broad use cases, at least for us, it's your large language models that you have like OpenAI, Claude, so on and so forth, which we're really integrating into our businesses, into our processes, into business reasoning and such, right? Then you have kind of a second group of what I'll say like open source models that are out there. Of course, DeepSeek recently has made waves in that space. This, democratizes a lot of AI, brings in competition, which I think any competition is good competition, but also comes with its own risks there. And then the last bucket, which I think is probably more where this discussion is going, is your SaaS applications that are sort of building in or providing Gen AI features as part of it. So this can be Slack or Zoom, whether you're summarizing meeting notes or you're kind of interpreting things as part of Slack and like doing summarization and analysis. So I would say those three buckets there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, just to put it in perspective, I know a lot of you have been feeling it. There was a report that I came across from late 2023. So we're talking almost a year and a half ago, that said at that time, 74% of SaaS providers had either already implemented AI or were testing AI for deployment. That was a year and a half ago. So imagine where we are today. It's effectively getting to the point where a lot of people ask themselves like, hey, does my toaster actually need to connect to the Wi-Fi, right? Like it's kind of a similar thing.
You don't want a Parker making you coffee in the morning, Josh.
Totally.
What?
So it's kind of at that point where every SaaS provider is like, oh, it's just a thing I need to do, regardless of whether there's actual business value behind it.
Yeah.
So I agree. Definitely something we need to focus on addressing. So we're going to set aside, like you said, the building of the LLMs. I think we have pretty good visibility on it. Nobody just accidentally stumbles into engineering work in your environment, right? Like those tend to come through contracts. We tend to have monitoring capabilities for it. So focusing more on the other two buckets, especially around the SaaS side, what are some of the challenges that we tend to think about or that people should be thinking about?
Yeah. And you're right. Like, I mean, for us, when you have a contract with OpenAI or Anthropic or whatever it is, you're doing it very consciously, right? You're going through deep legal and vendor reviews. You're putting structures in place. You can have separate infrastructure. You can have separate how you put contracts in place and how they use your data to then train their models and then benefit other customers or competitors. So you can put a lot of clauses in there to limit that sort of spread of that knowledge. But when it comes to, let's say, the open source bit, well, there's no one to have a contract with, right? That's the whole point of open source. Now, there's a benefit to that in that you have access to the code, right? So you can do deep reviews. You can understand what's happening. But then where AI kind of makes it a little bit more challenging is ultimately the model reasoning pieces of it is still going to be a black box for you, right? You're not necessarily able to impact that. We know with DeepSeek, for example, it's producing a lot more or higher occurrence of insecure code that it's spitting out. It has much higher occurrence of bias, toxicity, as well as hallucination. I think it's roughly a report came out about 3 to 4 times more than like Claude 3 or GPT-4. So there's significantly a difference in the quality, and then how you implement it also then matters, right? So for us, we're considering a lot of, how can we experiment with it and still take advantage of the cost effectiveness of something like DeepSeek, but then recognize that it has a lot of risks. Some of it can send data back to China. That's a huge geopolitical risk for us. So how do we limit that by just doing it on our local machines, right? So adding those controls as part of it when we think about that.
Well, and it sounds like a lot of the issues there for that type of application, that type of AI, really mirrors a lot of the traditional shadow IT aspects. People can go sign up with their corporate email. It could be as simple as Google SSO, where it's one click and all of a sudden you've broadened your perimeter, right? And so I think a lot of the stuff that contains to that, unless you want to go the additional step, like it sounds like you all are looking at Snap, where you're going to deploy containerized environments and you're going to restrict things down and you're basically going to consume that open source. A lot of it comes back down to just getting core visibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, some of it, again, I understand there's a privilege and a luxury in this, but our sort of focus is really how do we get ahead of it? We recognize that our engineers want to be able to use it. We want to enable the business. So the moment it comes out, it's making sure that we're doing the security reviews. we're going deep into it and then providing a very proactive guidance to our engineers as to where they can download it, how they use it, so on and so forth. These are, again, right, I think, and even when we talk about the SaaS piece of it with the Gen AI, it's recognizing that some of these controls are evolving, right? You can put some of these forth, they're not foolproof. So you kind of evolve with it, recognizing that there aren't a lot of hard controls yet potentially to put in place. With the SaaS side of it, I think you already touched on the challenge. A lot of it is people don't have a good visibility into all of the SaaS that they have. So that's a problem in itself, and that's a fundamental problem. But that aside, when these SaaS providers are now introducing these AI features, they're not really opt in, right? You're kind of signed up for them. And now you have to first know that that's been turned on and then go line by line and like work with the vendor and see if it can even be turned off. Sometimes it can't. For most of it, there isn't really on their configuration, you can do something to make it more secure either. So this is kind of where you really have to be conscious about what you care about, how much of it you care about to be able to even manage this challenge.
Well, it really comes down to understanding the potential impact, the business impact of that application.
Yeah.
All too often when we're thinking about the risk of generative AI in our SaaS products, you're like, oh, are they training the model on our data? Are they training the model on our data? Is our data being exposed? We're not necessarily thinking about some of the additional risks that those may carry. OWASP, which I'm sure many of you in the room are familiar with, had the top 10 forever and ever for things like SQL injection, all these kinds of things. Last year came out with the top 10 specifically for generative AI because it's such a nuanced type of application. And some of the things that are in there are like autonomy. It almost gets into psychology of dealing with AI, of how empowered is that agent within that application to make decisions on behalf of your organization. I think some of us have already seen some of the news articles of the airlines where the chatbot was empowered to go say, hey, we'll give you a free ticket for this thing. And really they weren't, right? So like there's some of those risks. Thinking about the usage of a recruiting platform. I know that's very relevant to some of the folks in here. What if the AI was all of a sudden filtering out some of the resumes that were coming in based on protected classes, right? So there's real business impacts to not understanding how these features are being used, how they're being, like how they were trained and how you're going to apply them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know while like safety is not the focus of this topic, but just as a sidebar, for us, especially because we have it in our product, it's extremely important for us to do a lot of adversarial testing to make sure that the products that we have out there have minimized bias, not hallucinating as much, as well as doing a lot of prompt injection and things like that. Obviously, our elections came up, making sure that we're providing as factual of data and not spreading misinformation or disinformation, right? So these are, when you have it in your product, you have to be very, very careful of how you're exposing it because it can have a mind of its own, right? And it now requires new teams and capabilities to be completely stood up to be able to do that kind of, and bring that kind of safety capabilities. Yeah.
Love that.
So sidebar, but
no,
nonetheless.
I love that. And so jumping into the sort of the meat of it of like, all right, so we all agree it's terrifying. There's all these big risks out there. Like, what's the so what? How do we start to think about fixing it? And I know when you and I were talking about this to prep, you and I kind of came to an agreement of like almost a 4-step framework for how to think about that.
Yeah.
Jump into it?
Happy to. And, I don't think any of these sort of frameworks are, first of all, radical or even new. I think anytime a new technology comes up, I think security people, kind of think of it in very similar terms. So I would urge all of us to first consider, regardless of what it is, ultimately, we need to be able to ask the first question, like, do we understand the risk of it? Do we care about the risk of it? I think people sometimes forget the other part. Just because there's a risk doesn't mean it's an important risk to our company.
Or
right?
it's the most important risk.
Or the most important, right? We have a lot of priorities, and that is very, very important to recognize. Within the context of your company, you also have to recognize where does the risk lie fundamentally for you as part of your risk model, as your risk tolerance. It could be user data, if that's what is most regulated, what is most important in terms of your brand impact, fines, loss. It could also be other enterprise data, right? It just depends on the model of the company that you are. So once you have kind of a good understanding of that, and those are supported by data classification efforts, really recognizing where your data is, where your other assets are, if availability is important to you, whatever it might be. Then moving on to what do you prioritize, right? So you understand the risk, you kind of know where your data is or the things that you care about. Companies have hundreds of SaaS out there at this point for most companies. You cannot really feasibly protect every single one of them. So how do you do it? Start with like the top 10 that you care about. That's probably a good goal to think about. So out of those, then starting to really understand, do we have visibility into it? And this is where, I think products like Productive, as well as other SaaS security posture management tools, very, very new space, but nonetheless sort of comes in where you start getting a understanding of what is the SaaS landscape, what is the configurations that are there, what are the authentication, authorization mechanisms, the connections and the communications that are occurring, how the data is being used, user auditing, so on and so forth, right? So really getting a sense of, for the priority SaaS apps that you have, what is actually happening. And then from there, you kind of start getting basically putting the fundamentals in place. This is always going to be true, right? So if we don't have a lot of ways to control or restrict Gen AI add-ons that are coming on, what we can and have control over is the configurations that exist, is the authentication and authorization mechanisms that we put in, the logging that we put in, the data protection mechanisms that we put in. So let's get that right. And then we'll worry about like these new insurgents of things that are coming in. Because I think when we get the fundamentals right, the other part of the risk will be reduced at minimum.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I would agree. And like I tend to go through the life cycle of things, right? So starting top of the funnel, you can't secure what you can't see. So start with that visibility, both the breadth and depth. From Productive, I kind of mentioned at the very beginning, we for a long time have really been pushing to give that visibility from a breadth perspective, your breadth of the portfolio. We've more recently been rolling out features for adaptive search that we can get down into the actual feature levels. And so that way we're able to start to compare, okay, what are the features that you have, and that it's inclusive of things like generative AI capabilities. And there's more that we're going to continue to roll it out over the coming terms. But really sort of stopping or looking top of level. So like start with your visibility, understanding the business use cases. So like, what is this application supposed to be doing? And is it continuing to do that, or is it varying from that? Understanding the features like we talked about, minimizing the footprint. I mean, as security leaders, many of you, we all talk about trying to minimize exposure, least privilege. But if you, especially on the SaaS platform, if everybody can go swipe a card and you have redundancy, well, it gets harder to actually contain that. If you have 500 applications and somebody says, hey, which of those go have SaaS or have AI included in them, it's going to be a lot harder to answer than if you have 100, right? So like minimizing and consolidating where you can. And then, getting those core fundamentals, auth in, auth z, logging, making sure you're understanding the footprint of that application and where it's starting to vary. And then I think the thing that really ties a lot of this together is making sure that it's ticked and tied with your vendor risk management program. So like, how do these things factor into your contracts? How many of you talk on a regular basis to your legal teams about the impacts on the vendor space? How many of you are actually having proactive conversations or when you're talking about roadmaps about what AI is coming? Now, obviously you can't do it for all of them, but like you said, prioritization. What are the top 10, 20, 30 that we may want to focus on, and thinking about it from, I don't know, if you're a more mature organization and you have engineering resources and you have a bigger security team, can you start to threat model some of these and actually wonder, hey, are there potential risks and exposures like our recruiting? Not something a lot of us spend a lot of time thinking about. Yeah,
no, absolutely. I think partnership with legal, especially when something is a new space, is so extremely important. Because while you're figuring out the technical ways to do it, at minimum, what you can do is limit the liability and the risk, the legal risk as related to it. So legal is definitely our best friend in terms of how closely we work with them. So I would recommend really, really bringing them close to how contracts are now being written for a lot of these SaaS. Yeah.